We're here with Dorothy Fischer on February, what's the
22nd.
Year 2000. Dorothy, would you tell me a little bit about, if you would please first spell your name for me?
My first name is Dorothy. That was a very popular name in 1914 when I was born. My last name, which I acquired by marriage, is Fischer.
And what was your maiden name?
Felkner, Felkner.
Okay. And you were born in 1914, so that makes you about...
I'll be 86 in May.
And very healthy, I hope.
Lucky.
Except for a little drippy nose today. Well, as I told you, and as you have heard from Kevin, what we're doing is talking a little bit about the German Village Society. We're not in this tape going back to the early days of the South End and immigration into the area, but we're talking about most of the last 40 years. But you were starting to tell me a while ago something I wanted you to pick up on, please, and that was that the German Village Society actually got its roots back in 50s, 58, 59, something like
59
that.
in November.
What was significant about that month, that time?
Mr. and Mrs. Fetch and Mrs. Fetch's father, Harry Royce, had bought and restored, I think, 4 properties. And they wanted to spread the word that this was a good idea and it was a good way to preserve houses that were of historical value. So when they finished one on Wall Street, they made quite an effort to get publicity, and it was Janice Jordan of the Dispatch who gave them a full page on a Sunday in November. And it stated that the house was ready to rent, and they would have an open house on a Sunday near Thanksgiving, and they would put out a guest book only for those who wanted to join an association. So, of course, I went.
And where were you living at the time?
I was living, 59. I was living at 541 City Park Avenue at the corner of Hoster, in a typical brick house.
And how long had you been living there?
Only about a year. My first house in the village was 551 City Park, which is a little frame house with handmade nails, and I have a feeling it might be older than some of the brick houses.
So, if you'll help me, you were living elsewhere in the city until the late 50s?
Yes, I was born in the North End, and we kept moving farther north. The first year I was in college, we moved to Worthington. But later in life, I was alone, and I thought I'd come to the South End and see if I could fix up a little old house. 551 was my first love.
And that was after Frank Fitch had done the house on Wall Street?
No, that was before.
So you
I arrived in 52 in the house, in the frame house on City Park Avenue. And I felt strongly that there should be an association so that people who liked old things and liked the historic houses would know about it when one came up for sale. That was my picture of an association that we should have. And I remarried shortly after I moved to City Park Avenue, and my mother, who had been considering moving to Florida, came back and lived with us, and I preached at the dinner table every night how we should have an association, but I didn't talk to anybody except my own family until I read the full-page story in the Dispatch about Frank Fetch and his family, and then I went down, of course, and offered my help.
Did you know Frank until that time?
No, I had never heard of these people, but I hurried down there.
Tell me a little bit about what German Village, or the Old South End as it was known then, looked like around the early 50s when you moved here and on up till the association got going.
Many people thought that it was a mistake to put any money at all in a house. In fact, I had trouble getting a mortgage. And the northern part, north of Beck Street, was largely owned by absentee landlords. There were many people from rural areas of Kentucky and West Virginia who didn't have the same standards we did. There was a woman across the street with little children. She was a housewife. She didn't work. And they had, somebody gave them a watermelon in August, and they sat on the porch and threw the rinds out on the sidewalk, and on Thanksgiving Day that year it had snowed a little bit, and I happened to cross the street there and walk toward Livingston Avenue, and it was so bumpy. I wondered why, and then I discovered the watermelon rinds were still there. So that was a shock to me, and we did have a few people in the neighborhood who were alcoholic and caused disturbances on Saturday night, and the paddy wagon would come. But I never had any difficulty of any sort at all.
And could you talk a little bit about the general shape of the buildings down here, the houses at that time?
Well, of course, an absentee landlord who is not getting much rent is not going to keep them painted up and plant little trees in front as people do now, and I have gardens.
Were there a lot of houses in complete ruin? Was the city threatening to tear a lot of them down?
Yes, when we bought our house, our two houses it was on one lot at 481 South 3rd Street, we bought it in late '61. It had been condemned by the building department, which is worse than being condemned by the housing department. So we had quite a bit of work to do right away to get those, what do they call them? The things that are pointed out as being bad. For instance, the back fence was a wire fence and it was half down, and so that was one of the things we were to do right away.
Was it a dangerous place to live?
I never had any trouble at all. Actually, I've shortened it a little bit by mistake. I lived in that little frame house 5 years alone, and I never had any trouble at all.
Tell me a little bit about Frank Fetch and his character.
Oh my, Frank Fetch was a true artist. He could see a house that the rest of us thought was just absolutely hopeless, and he could make it attractive. He was very, very talented in that way. And as he described himself, he said, "I'm a fast starter, and you are too." We would get an idea, and then we'd want it to go right away. And he had such vision. I was the treasurer for the first 9 years, and he just worried me to death because, for instance, when they tore down the Deschler Hotel, he wanted $300 out of our treasury to buy all the doorknobs. And I thought that was scandalous. And, well, there were many things I thought were too risky, but they turned out well because Frank had the vision and the courage to go ahead and do it.
I've been told by several people that he was quite persuasive.
Oh my, yes.
So tell me about those, say for instance, that very first meeting, the very first organizational meeting of the society.
We planned a community meeting for the public right away. And I remember how disappointed I was when Mrs. Fetch said, "I think we'll wait now until after the holidays." But that meeting was set and was advertised for January the 10th in the Schiller Park Schiller House. And exactly 100 people came. It was a nice Sunday afternoon. There were people dotted around, not only Frank Fetch, but George Fasting, the dancing teacher too, and many people whose names I don't remember, but who knew of each other's restorations because they could see the post lantern, the iron fence, the painted up trim and all that sort of thing. And they were so glad to know each other to know who that fella is who's putting the gray shutters on that house and that kind of thing. It was a real reunion.
So what happened at that meeting, and when exactly was it?
It was January the 10th on a Sunday afternoon in Schiller Park,
And so
1960.
1960, and so you had 100 people show up, and I understand that many of them did not live here. Is that correct?
Well, some did not live here because they were people who liked antiques, who liked old houses, who saw that we had so much of the German architecture that it could make a community of people who liked old houses.
And did many of those locate to the South End?
Oh yes, yes. Many of those people came. Some people had the feeling that you could not join the society unless you lived here, and we did our best to dispel that. And one of our active members, who was president for quite a while, always lived in Upper Arlington. He never moved here, although he did buy a couple of houses and restore them.
So was there some sort of a sign-up sheet or a guest book at that first meeting? Or
I don't remember.
Did you end the meeting by saying, okay, here the German Village Society is hereby formed, or something like that?
No, we had no name for it. And I'm sure we must have had a sign-up sheet so we could get in touch with people later, but I don't remember about it. I remember the sign-up book in the little house on Wall Street in November of '59, but I don't remember it in the big meeting. But we said we would meet every month. And then Frank, more or less at random, I think, because of the interest that people were showing, appointed people on a, I can't think of the word. It was pre-board. You know, it was a steering committee.
Okay.
That's what I'm searching for. And then we began to call ourselves a board. It was not cut in stone, because if somebody would turn up who was very active, or maybe there was one man who lived in the neighborhood of Carroll, Ohio, and he had several properties here that he rented. He was not a slumlord by any means, but he was asked to be on the board. And we had a meeting in February, and not very many people came. And then we had a meeting of the steering committee, or the board, I don't know what we were calling it, after Valentine's Day at the Newkirk's house on Stimmel Street. And I know that meeting was after Valentine's Day because someone commented on the flowering plant that Helen Newkirk had on her coffee table, and she said that was my Valentine gift from my husband. So in the last part of February of 1960, Bob Carotas said, why don't we call it German Village? And the rest of us liked that idea, and then right away the real estate people took it up. I think the very next Sunday houses were advertised for sale in German Village, and we didn't even have legal boundaries yet. The students, architecture students at Ohio State thought we should consider German Village from Parsons Avenue to the river. But Frank was too crafty for that. He said we will not be able to dictate exterior control to the business people on High Street. So the west boundary was made at Pearl Alley.
And Parsons was just, as I read, it was just considered too far gone, right?
Well, too far away is what we thought, and we hoped to have a commission. And a commission was named by City Council in July of '60, but it had very, very little power. Mm-hmm. You see, the power of the commission now is that a property owner may not change the exterior of a building until he has a certificate of appropriateness from the German Village Commission. Then he may get a building permit, but not before. So that's where we have teeth in the commission.
And I understand that over the years there have been some people just outside the village who've been a little bit maybe jealous of the property values and the restoration efforts in the city and wanted to become a part of the association too. Is that right?
Wanted us to extend the eastern boundaries to include what's now, or part of what's now, Schumacher Place.
But I understand Frank held firm on that. Frank Fetch held firm and said we should not extend the boundaries. We should not try to do that.
No, Frank thought that was a good idea.
Oh, okay.
And the rest of us overrode him and spoke to the mayor and that kind of thing, and so it never happened.
Okay.
There are a great many misconceptions, if you'd like to hear of one, about
Sure.
where the boundaries are. I was in a taxi one time and the driver said to me, you know, they're extending the boundaries of German Village farther and farther south. They'll get to my street soon. And I said, where is your street? And he said, Morrill Avenue. And that would be quite an extension, and it's never even been suggested that I've heard of that we would.
It's been cut back a little bit, right? In the early years, were the boundaries shrunk just a little bit, or have
Shrunk from what?
I read one article that said, no, we can't go as far as Gates Street to the south or something like that. We're going to pull it back. But have the boundaries always been the same since they were set in the early days?
Yes, except for a little strip along Livingston Avenue, and that was corrected and the boundary was moved up to Livingston Avenue. 67 maybe. I don't remember exactly.
But it's essentially been the same 233 acres all along.
Set by city ordinance.
One of the things that keeps coming up in the older articles I've read is all of this has been done without any federal funds.
Yes.
It's a huge restoration project, and it's all. One article described it as a do-it-yourself urban renovation or urban renewal. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, do-it-yourself brings to mind people with a hammer and a paintbrush, and many of us did that sort of thing. We called it doing the house over with Kim Tone and Scotch tape. And but I think it was about half and half. Some people had the capital to plan it with the help of an architect maybe, and then just have a contractor come in and sublet it.
And on a bigger scale, though, there's never been any public money.
No, Frank was adamant about that. He thought that if the federal government stepped in, there would be strings attached and red tape that would slow us down. And he said, let's do it with our own money.
Now, tell me a little bit about your husband. His name was?
Ralph Fischer.
He took so many pictures, right?
Yes, I should say so.
And when did he take all those pictures?
Well, we were married in '57, and he lived just east of what's now German Village all his life, and went to South High School, and he was used to this. It took him a while to get the feeling that these little houses are valuable and are unusual, because he'd seen them all his life. So, I suppose maybe in the late 60s he began taking lots of pictures, and he loved to take pictures on the day of the house and garden tour.
Did he do this with the idea that they might become part of some historical record at a future date, or did he just enjoy taking pictures?
A little of both.
So he started that in the late 50s or around 60?
No, in the late 60s, I think, before he got the feeling that these houses are really something nice. It's unusual. And then, of course, we began to draw his father out, because his father had been born in a typical Dutch brick. We use the word Dutch. It's come from Deutsch. at German houses at the corner of Jackson and Grant. And his father always said that people didn't have to leave this neighborhood for anything. There was a shoe store on City Park Avenue, there were millinery shops, there were dry goods shops, there were lots of butcher shops, family-owned groceries, and saloons. And the Germans didn't really have to leave their neighborhood for all their needs. Mm-hmm.
Was he of German ancestry?
Yes. Mm-hmm. His both his grandparents had come from Germany, but not my husband's parents.
And you said he grew up just east of here?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He lived on Stanley between Washington and Beach. And Beach is the 3rd Street. There's Ebner and another street, and then Beach. So it's 3 blocks east of what's now German Village.
Did he share his pictures with a lot of people at the time? Did he offer slideshows to...
Mm-hmm. We had slideshows at membership meetings and parties, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
Did he share them with a lot of visitors to the area?
After a while, we began to do that. Not early.
How many years did he shoot pictures?
Well, he was shooting pictures until he died suddenly in 1977.
So for about 10 years or more, probably.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And those pictures are here now.
How many of them are there?
I don't know. I think Darren Wisnowski could give you an idea, but I can't.
What do you see as you look at German Village today, and you've been here for almost 50 years now, what are the, aside from the fact that the houses look better, what are the major changes between now and, say, 1960 when the whole movement really got started?
Well, people think of it as an interesting place, rather a prestige place, and many people who are new to the area join the society and begin to get acquainted. And there are groups of people who do deadheading in the park and take a little section and see that it's watered and that the dead flowers are taken off. And then they go out and maybe have a sandwich together. And there are all these little groups meeting for one reason or another. And people really feel like it's a community.